Yeah, and usually I just tell people to start wherever they want, but for you, we're starting with your fabulous book on the tarot and divination cards.
And divination cards,
How
yes.
did this book come about?
Well, it's a long and interesting story. I read cards professionally now. I've not done that for a very long time. I read card for very, very long, but I started to read card professionally for about like, I don't know, 5, 6 years. And that's something I started when I was like 11, but at no moment I thought it was going to be useful to do it for others. It was really part of a very private spiritual practice for me, like working with the images and having, and it's just like I had this thing, but I kind of like, it was really on and off throughout my life. And then I had two readings, one in Dale. At the moment, the Barbier Museum was folding, and another one by a tarot reader who was also happened to be Joanna's stepmom. And both of them, the medium from Leadydale, Lauren Thibodeau, and her, Judy, told me, give me the same message, maybe like 6 months in between, which was basically you need to read cards and you're going to channel by doing automatic writing. So, the first time I was like, oh, that's so great. And everyone, all my friends were like, oh, that's great. You have the look, just like, "Oh, whatever." And so I went to France that summer. I brought back some part of my tarot book collection. And it was, interesting to redouble. And then when I got the second reading, suddenly I just took it so much more seriously. And it just felt like retrieving my mother tongue. Basically, it's just like something I've forgotten, and now it was just back there. So fast forward a couple of months, I'm just like, well, I'm gonna try to, I should, people should know I'm reading cards now. So I started an Instagram because I'm a millennial and that's what we do. I love curating images. This is what I do, like to avoid working. I go on library database, and I just try like keywords and see what comes up and spend hours kind of leafing through the results. And so I've done that for, I don't know, like so many years. And I was like, what if I just try to put the word tarot or divination card? And then all those deck came through, from British Library, Welcome Museum, the Gallica database, which is the French National Library, and that's so interesting. Like I've been to all those places, in libraries and thing, and those cards are never on display. They're just never on display ever. So maybe instead of doing a boring Instagram where I'm like, this cards mean this and this cards mean that, because that's not how I work anyway. I thought, well, maybe people are going to be interested in seeing those cards that have been part of people's life before, um, you know, the Rider Waite Smith, and of course people are, because people are curious and are enthused by beautiful things. For some completely and the completely and related reason, the Instagram became popular, and I worked with that publisher before, and he told me, oh, what about we do a book on tarot and divination cards? And that's how it came to be. The book took me 3 years to research and 9 months to write, um and which is why it's so thick. Oh my
Yeah,
god.
it's a thick book and it's so beautifully printed.
Thank you. It's just
It's
it's a really,
amazing.
yeah, I'm happy they took, you know they took pleasure in making it so sexy.
Lavish. It is a lavish book.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the subject matter really earned it. I think that tarot is it's such a strangely Venusian Taurus, uh, tool. And the way I read it, it really relies on the beauty of the card. So, to speak about something that is so subjective as much as, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, you had to, like, I think they did a really great job, like creating a perfect little shrine for all those images that are just like super inspiring and beautiful.
Yeah, and it's so amazing to see how different people have interpreted these kinds of like archetypes or symbols or yeah, these different cards over centuries,
Yeah.
many centuries.
Yeah, well, that's the thing that that's the thing I found interesting, but it's not specific to tarot either. It's how, we function with images, and the history of the iconography of tarot, is so interesting because it's not the history of its function. It's just the story of how we relate to images, and how those images come to mean specific things at certain times. And so when you look at the history of tarot, we think of tarot as, like, this maybe divination tool or introspective tool that really kind of like comes and dig within the most intimate part of ourselves, or speaks about potential futures that are very intimate. And when you have like a which has been my case several times during my lifetime, I had like a pretty insane divinatory revelation through reading, and you're like, how this person knows me so well, from. And but when you take the card, it will also speak about us as a culture, and I'm really interested in that, as much as I'm interested in the divinatory, or psychological aspect of the tarot. Like, there is something that's so profoundly human, about the tarot, about a tool, which is used for game, but also hijacked from that first function to become, like, some kind of prognostic um platform, like, and then a platform on which people project fears, hopes, dreams, ideals, all that stuff, like, and the way it's seeing the way it shifts too. The I found that really fascinating. At the time the tarot was invented in the 15th century, you look at that first branch, where you see the quote unquote the battler, the magician, who's basically an artisan. You see the pope, the monk, the fool, and you see those people, they can't really, their fate is sealed. If they were born rich, they will stay rich. If they were born poor, they will stay poor. They can't. There is no trans class. So, like, the idea of fate was so much more present in the 15th century, and so of course people, like, I imagine, we're like trying to find ways to kind of escape it. But now, in the since the 19th century, people have, like, we have all this, like, new ideas, self-made and genius, and the idea that you can start from nothing and become very rich, or become very smart, or become, those are very contemporary ideas, and they're and you can see them in the tarot. You see them reflected in those tarot decks and the way they are designed, the way the little booklets are written, et cetera, et cetera. So I just found it like never exhausting topic. And yeah.
Absolutely. And I love that you include contemporary tarot decks as well. I have some of the OC decks. They're so beautiful. And I don't have the Ghetto Tarot deck, but I've seen it online before and it's so striking, especially the Justice card. I feel like that is just the most beautiful portrayal of justice. It's such a striking card.
Yeah, the Ghetto Tarot is really interesting, and people don't I mean, the stories in the book. It was created by this woman called Alice Smith, and when she used to travel to Haiti, and she met this group of artists called Artistes Resistance, were sculpture in Port-au-Prince, and they collaborated on that tarot deck, and some of the images, I think, are some of the most beautiful, most impactful tarot cards. My favorite one is the High Priestess from the Ghetto Tarot, which, basically, it's this black woman. She's, like, kind of wrapped in this, like, priestess shroud, and then the two columns are made out of drape. They're just like those two pieces of fabric that are supposed to kind of recall to the actual columns from the Jacquim and Boaz, the Temple of Solomon column. And there is something in the high priestess, like there is an holographic aspect in her meaning. The fact that she's not really from her world. She might be just a presence or a projection coming from between those two pillars and coming forth. There's something very abstract about that card. And even if you look at the Rider-Waite-Smith, she kind of looks like a torso on a cube, a veiled torso. She almost like if she had emerged from that cube, that throne, out of nowhere, like a puff of smoke. And there is no card that translated better, I think, that kind of like holographic emerge, kind of smoke and mirror aspect than the Getotao and that high priestess. Everything becomes a veil, like in that card. And I don't know, she's like, I found it just incredible.
It is incredible. I saw recently an article that the Whitney is going to have an exhibition of Pamela Coleman Smith. It's like people are starting to recognize the art world. People are starting to recognize her as an artist again because she was recognized back in her day,
Well, she was at a moment.
A moment.
And moments, and then there's something happened, and she, like she got, kind of sucked out of, she died in great poverty, somewhere in Great Britain. I can't remember I can't remember the exact place she died in, but yeah, the Whitney included her in this kind of exhibition called Women of the Avant-Garde, like I guess after the incredible success of Ilma Hofklimt and the Guggenheim, which was just such a magnificent show, but also for the first time that architecture felt like a sacred space. I think that it's just that seeing all those painting and the spiral rotunda felt like really being in a temple. So it just brought, I guess, the sacred architecture back for once, but suddenly, hot topic, spiritualist woman, early avant-garde. A lot of museums are doing shows about it, and I think it's great, like it's really great. But yeah, so when the Whitney right now is showing a couple of the early cards and some drawings that she did in the early 20th century, but she really was a visionary. There is something there is this drawing, and I can send you an image of it if you want. There is this drawing that she did like a landscape of New York, kind of a skyline of New York. And I might not be completely exact on this, but I think the drawing is from 1905, and it's before the actual skyline of New York, before New York was filled with skyscraper. But yet she saw it. She saw it before everyone else. So she really was, like she was connected to something, and she managed to kind of like transpose that in her work. And I found that quite exciting, to be honest. I think that now it's been, and then we have to thank people like Mary K. Greer and a lot of those, like 70s tarot reader who became tarot scholar, and then tried to kind of like understand the production of that time historically and visually as well. But yeah, if it wasn't for that generation of women in the 70s, who knows if we we would know who Pamela Coleman Smith really is. There is very little. There used to be very little, and now we have like actual scholarships and academic books about her. So it's really great. She's such an inspiration to me. She's such a strange and I love, like I found a complete kinship toward Pamela Coleman. I think one of the reason I'm French, but I read the Rider-Waite-Smith because for some reason there's something in that early century kind of like post pre-Raphaelite, like longing
Mm.
for medieval troubadour stuff that really correspond to something of my own personal sensibility. I don't read with the Marseille, and most people think it's so vulgar for a French person not to read the Marseille. I did read it for so long, but it's just like, like I found the images she created are such a poetic, never ending well, they just never cease to bring something surprising and shockingly matter of fact very often. So I'm
Yeah, and I
excited.
think you wrote that she created them all from like April till October 1909. Like she created the whole deck in such a short period of time.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just like it's like there was a lot of controversy around like what did she create it for it, like obviously Waite gave her some kind of a very kind of like tight parameters for the major arcana, but it's usually accepted or open that she created that new technology of the minor arcana being completely illustrative. She might have been inspired by the Solabusca deck, which is a 15th century deck. There's a great book about it in Scarlet imprint for people who the book, the Solabusca book, the Solabusca book, the Scarlet, it's just like such a mad, amazing read, and I recommend everyone who's interested in tarot history to check it out. But so yeah, so like this new technology of like having the major minor arcana as like figurative cards, suddenly kind of opened up a more intuitive approach, which was clearly needed. And like in the age of Aquarius, 60s, 70s, it completely thrived. People thrived on openness and fluidity. So like suddenly reading card was not absorbing a very long system. It was something more kind of like instinctive and sensual as well. So I'm more from that. It's that sensibility for sure.
Absolutely. And it's so much more rich to read all the symbols and images like for the minor arcana than just some decks that I have that just have still like the swords and the numbers and not any kind of
Mm-hmm.
images. I have some decks that I really love the imagery of the cards that do have like faces, but then when they have a lot of just the kind of numbers and swords or wands or cups without any images on those cards. I find them hard to read because I'm so used to the Rider-Waite Smith. I used that for such a long time. I had the same deck from when I was like 13 until I was in New York. It probably was like 2016. I had the same deck that I used, and then I was at KGB bar, and I guess I lost it. I lost it there.
Someone found it. It's probably a great tarot reader now.
Yeah, and ever since then, I've ordered so many decks, and always trying to find like the one I want, but I just constantly changing decks now. I haven't found like one that I want to use all the time.
Yeah, it's so interesting this and then you were talking about Uzi, which I love. I love their work so much. And I mean, I don't fall for decks so much. I'm like, I collect a lot of things, and I've got a problem. I'm a total hoarder. My house is a complete mess, but I do not collect tarot deck because it has this, it's a dead object, unless it's red. And it's just like maybe it's my own insanity. I tend to maybe anthropomorphize the deck too much, or at least the relationship for me is really human. Um, and very much like I can't very much because like I'm not polyamorous. No problem if people are, of course, but I can't read with so many decks. I feel like I have this friendship or relationship with the Rider-Waite Smith, and sometimes I rekindle with others, but that's the thing that just like it's the love of my life. It's so hopelessly romantic to say so, but that's the one I do my best job, like uh that's the one that really helps people for me, like it's just my you know like that's the I'm the meat puppet of the card, so they kind of they tell me what I'm supposed to bring forth, but that's the I think that's brought from the relationship itself. But meanwhile, I'm amazed about all those decks, and the fact that very much like tattoos in the 2000s, there is this weird new movement, like tattoos used to look like tattoos in 2000, and tarot decks used to look like tarot decks, and then suddenly they were kind of reclaimed. The two practice were reclaimed by artists. We decided, what if we own this, and we were just using, kind of reinventing the rule according to our very peculiar sensibility, and suddenly you have all this, just this incredible wealth of well, visual production, like people like Uzi reinvents systems, like they bring like such an intelligent, visually complex, but also really accessible, and it's really easy to love. Uzi stuff. They're big in other world. It's just such a beautiful, it's
It's
such a
such a beautiful deck.
yeah, it's so masterful visually, yet I know tons of people read it and would just feel like, spontaneously drawn to it and can create a relationship with it. So that I'm excited to be part of, just to be a witness of that kind of like tarot culture 2.0, like after internet, after all those images circulates, that now we have access to history, techniques, we can create community around it, we can learn and teach, and find each other around the world. That's a really exciting time to be in as a tarot reader, for sure. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I made my own cut up deck, but I've only made the major arcana.
Uh-huh.
And as much as sometimes I don't mind just reading with the major arcana, I really like all of the different aspects and nuances and dynamics in the whole deck in the minor arcana too.
Yeah.
So so that's the one I go to when I just want to pull like a card or something, or sometimes when I'm doing yoga in the morning, I like to light a candle and pull a card for the day, and I'll use the one that I made. But when I
Mhm.
do full readings, I like to use the whole deck. But yeah, I
Mhm.
still haven't. I even got a new Rider Waite Smith, but it's like not the one that I had for so long. That deck was just like, it wasn't
Mhm.
falling apart, but it was very well used.
Yeah.
And I was just, yeah, I was so attached to it that I've never been able. Maybe it's like it was my love, and I haven't
Yeah.
been able to find a replacement. So now I'm just shuffling through all these. I'm dating all these other decks. I'm just like, no, you're not the
Exactly.
same. No, you're not the same.
You're
It's my lost love.
you're a heartbroken tarot reader. I just feel like it's I found well, I feel for you so
I
much
think
with
that's true. That's
that.
a long time to have the same deck.
But it's just like that's the thing too. Like it's just like I can't stop thinking. I can't stop thinking about what times of your life that deck accompanied. Probably your whole transformation to, like girls to teen to women to master shrink. Super. Like
It was
established.
there.
Like scholar, and so it's just of course like all those cards told your story in a different way and managed to kind of guide you to be this like super, like um well, incredibly talented and and aggregator of super smart and interesting people, and always doing some always taking something new out of a hat. It's just like I can see why that deck can, it's just like it's almost like your whole story is like somewhere lost in New York. What
Yeah,
happened?
sits in the Lower East Side.
Yeah, well, there is a whole book, there is a whole, at least a whole poem to be written about this story,
See,
like,
that would help.
yeah,
Maybe I need to make it into something. Make
you need
something about it, and then maybe I can find another deck to use that will be satisfying for this section of my life.
to.
Also, speaking of such interesting people, amazing that Rachel Pollack wrote the foreword for your book. Hello.
Yeah. Well, Rachel, and I'm saying this as a, like, she's not well right now. So, sending lots of love to her, and hoping that people who listen to this will send her love and message message of love. She reads them, so like it really helps her. But yeah, Rachel is I don't know how to say it. She's like she's like one of the most amazing human I know, and because she's extremely wise, but she's also extremely fun. And you know, to go back to what I was talking slightly earlier, like this generation of women, you know, like there is a lot of like different, you know, the sensibilities in tarot between the psychological tarot and intuitive tarot and traditional tarot, or you know, like people come from an occult background or sometimes not. And there's something to be said, you know, if I had to kind of reclaim my affiliation, it is profoundly Anglo-Saxon, but not, you know, it's from those like, you know, like the hippie woman, you know, from the 60s and 70s, you know, the Mary Greer and Rachel of this world were complete punks, you know, like I had on my Patreon, um, I did an interview with Cheryl Smith, who was a tarot historian, and I was she's, you know, in her late 70s, and she was telling us about, you know, like how it was to try to learn tarot in the 60s and 70s without the internet in the Bay Area, you know, and people creating decks, all that stuff. And the DIY spirit is so unparalleled, you know, like and also like a person like Mary Greer writing a book like Tarot for Yourself in the 80s, you know, like it's kind of a one of a kind book. At the time, people were not really reading cards for themselves. It was considered superstitious, so it really was like, you know, kind of kicking the envelope. Yeah, they were so punk, you know, like, and Rachel really is a, she wouldn't say that about herself, but I'll say it because it's true. She's such an irreverent, fantastic storyteller, and I think that's one of the thing I love so much about her. You know, like one of the thing I learned, you know, and I think a lot of people learn is that um the stories have the power to change our lives, you know, and tarot is a tool that articulate one story, like one possibility, and we can basically take decision around it or use it to inspire us or use it as a cautionary tale. But um but and of course, you know, I'm not saying that tarot is not magical, but maybe it's just about this, you know, maybe it's just about tarot is about the power of you know, speaking, the power of envisioning our own story and verbalizing it, you know, which I think, you know, is very, you know, close to you know, I'm not a psychoanalyst myself, but I'm very interested in it, and the idea of just finding the words or telling your own story or trying to articulate it with your own language. You know, tarot is very much about that, and I think Rachel was you know, like you know, like really changed the really changed the scope of things, you know, like she wrote, you know, like she worked for comics, and she wrote not like the tarot stuff is like a large part of what she did, but she also wrote like I don't know how many novels and things, and she really displayed that, you know, like being a good tarot reader is being a good storyteller, and understanding that a story, whether it is or just a myth, is potent and has power to kind of shift paradigms within us.
Yeah, exactly. People thrive with myth and metaphor, and these kinds of allegories. And I feel like that's what really mainstream culture has tried to take away a lot, is like the power of myth and make everything like,
Mm.
super. I mean, science is great too, but you can't just boil everything down to its parts and think that's the whole thing. They're like myth and metaphor and allegories are so potent, and people really think and understand in those ways.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting that too. You know, obviously, I'm not. I was listening to this radio show in French. You know, I listen to the radio a lot, and and I listen to French radio because I'm French. And so we have a lot of like great philosophy show, and one of them that I was listening a couple of days ago was on some there was like a recording of Jacques Lacan, yeah. And he was talking about that one thing you probably know so much more about this. He was talking about a text that Freud wrote at some point where he compared his discovery of psychoanalysis and put it in perspective of like Copernicus kind of changing the paradigm of, like the solar system, and, like the earth is not at the center, the sun is at the center. And then the fact that, discovering the whole um psychoanalytic theory was felt like this, and Lacan was talking, oh well, actually I see things differently slightly, but and so it was just interesting because I've heard him speak so much in other shows, but like there was something about his way of speech, like his like love of puns, and his great theatricality when he speak, just like when Lacan speak, it's a spectacle, you don't, it doesn't read this way. And I didn't try hard. I'm gonna say this, don't quiz me, but I was just kind of completely amazed by his way of speech, because when I read the card, it's the same thing, like very often they function, to me at least, in visual puns, the idioms, I will see an element and the element will be an idioms coming up, like, and so there is like this very strange aspect of like image, language, stories, um something, like people speak about that language of the birds, that this kind of like use of puns and magical text to kind of hide secrets or different levels of understanding. And I feel that that's one of the great pleasure of the cards, they have a slang, they speak, the same card will speak differently to you with a different tone, and it makes it so it makes it as a tool, whether we use it for divination or for introspection. It makes it such a live tool. It's like it's the real never-ending story, it's just like things reshuffle, the story kind of reshuffle itself every time, like all the parameters are repositioned, and the matrix evolves, from it's like some kind of like strange narrative ecosystem. I found that really beautiful.
That is wonderful, and I'm glad you brought up Lacan because I wish I could listen to him and understand what he was saying in French, because that's exactly how I feel like. Obviously, I haven't been able to do that and understand him, but uh, when I read, he didn't write very much. He only has like one collected, a book of collected writings that apparently he was like very against even publishing because he didn't like writing so much. But everything that we have of his are all these talks, and people have transcribed them from recordings of the talks, but he wasn't involved in the editing or anything like that. And then, so many academic Lacanians spend so much time kind of arguing points and trying to like systematize what he was saying. And, here he said this in this later seminar, and that kind of negates what he said earlier. And to me, that just feels so much like missing the point, because I definitely, even reading these edited seminars, I just get this feeling that you just kind of have to like just let go of that and just kind of like read along and like let it kind of wash over you, and you're going to be confused at times, and you're going to be like struck at times, and you just have to kind of go with it, and see what happens. It just sparks something. So I can imagine that in person he was very much this kind of like experience, like an event, and he feels to me very much like he was just like he is obviously so well read and has read so many things and thought about so many things. And it seems to me when he goes up, he has kind of like an idea of what he's going to talk about, but he really just like lets himself kind of associate. And it feels to me like like he is kind of like in this experience of what psychoanalysis does, like when you're conducting sessions where people are able to like really tap into their unconscious and let themselves associate and play with language and kind of see where it leads, rather than having this like fixed idea of like where he's going to go, and yeah, how all these formulations are going to be. That's just how I imagine him and perceive him. Who knows what that's, what's true. But there was something you wrote in the book about people trying to kind of calcify something that's like moving and evolving. And when I read that sentence in the book, I thought of exactly that, of all these like psychoanalysts trying to kind of lock down theories that are evolving theories, and they're like live practices, and your theories and your ideas should always be evolving, because it's a practice, and when you encounter different people, you're going to learn different things, and different things are going to come up. So like trying to lock down these theories is, to me, completely pointless.
Yeah, and I just like I don't, again, I'm not here to have like strong opinion about psychoanalysis, because, you know, I'm a patient, so, and second, I just like, it's like I have such a great respect for everyone who is trying, to use their time and energy to heal others. Like that's the, but I'm just, like what you're saying is so interesting, and it really speak about, I think, a great divide in general between, theory and practice. Like the fact that like people write a lot of book on tarot too, and argue about things, but none of, and I'm happy I wrote this book, but it's okay, like I'm proud of it, but it's just also, it's outside of me now, and my work only has value because I do the practice, because I read card for people, and that's the real sacred space. It is in the that, for the way I see it, it's like a poetic, a healing poetic art form. Like the value of tarot starts very much like in a session, in session. Start at the beginning and at the end, and then there is time between, but that's when the magic happened. Then the rest, the books, the history, of course it's interesting, and of course I'll keep studying, but the real magic is like the motion, and the fact that I'm gonna prove myself wrong every day, because I've just suddenly it's a live, it's a living art form, and very much like, I'm sure, psychoanalysis, like you're, it's almost like you're redefining your practice every time you're in session, because like you hear something differently, or I'm sure you're trying to kind of put your theory, but also your own sensibility toward helping or bringing, I guess, the patient to somewhere. Again, I'm just completely, your whole work is a mystery to me. So
You're
I
allowed
only,
to
only know
theorize about
the
it.
the couch part, because that's where it's at. It's just, it's really, I'm fascinated by psychoanalysis. I just found it like such an ending well, um of intriguing, at least for me, and which is one of the reason I'm like an avid listener of your podcast, and your work. I found analyst and philosopher. I mean, like, I guess it's like, a Western shamanism. Maybe it's totally insane to say that, but this is the only the only domain where subjectivity has a value, you know, and that things are not quantifiable, and that theory are not really verifiable. Things march in a very different pace, and having that reintegrated in a Western rational worldview is it's just like incredibly bold. I'm happy I was born, and I got to experience it, like, well, while it was kind of normalized, but it's
Yeah,
just,
I think anybody who's been in analysis understands psychoanalysis, because that's really how you understand it, is by seeing these kind of ideas. Like, you can read about it all the time, but it's not until you, like, see something at play in your own life, and then you're like, oh, is that what he's talking about? Like, I see how that works, but it's very different experientially than it is just reading somebody try to explain, what some certain theory is like.
yeah, yeah, and it's
I
just the,
often wonder what it would be like to have been in analysis without studying it. Those people really fascinate me, like people who don't read it and don't study it, but are in analysis. It's like, I wonder what that's like when you don't like know the theories. I mean, of course, in popular culture, some of the theories are just around and people just know them generally. But when you don't like kind of know these theories to look for, what is it like to just kind of put things together without that? It must be amazing.
well, I can tell you this, for having been for a little while in the Lacanian, like zone. It's terrifying. I knew psychoanalysis, but I didn't understood the Lacanian side of it, and I found it to be both interesting and terrifying. And the first time my shrink pulled a short session on me, I was just like, what is this? What
It's
does
like
that mean?
someone smacking you in the face.
Yeah, and I was
That's
like,
how I felt. They were like, bam. I was like, what? What's
exactly.
happening now?
Exactly. I was just like, really? Like, and so I was like, okay, it must mean something. Let's just go and try to find out what she's trying to, point at right now. But yeah, like the thing is nobody gives you the road book for this, I guess now I'm interested in the road book as much as I'm interested in them, just not, rationalizing it too much. It's really it's okay, but yeah, strange ride. Really strange stuff. Really strange stuff.
Yeah, I like experiences and processes. When I read tarot for myself, I always do it intuitively, and then I always look at Rachel's book, the 78 Degrees of Wisdom, and see what she has to say about the cards I pulled, because no matter how many times I've read that book or how many times I've read my own tarot, it's like she always has some gem in there that I hadn't thought of
Yeah,
for like every card. There's
yeah,
always like something in there, and I'm like, that makes perfect sense.
yeah. But I think the cards that have this very strange um power, I guess. They're very they're very potent in their way of like reinventing themselves. And of course I think it's also linked to um what we project on it. And that's the thing that is very interesting to me, because I don't really read my cards for myself. I work with cards every day for other people, or I do other type of work um with them. But if I need a tarot reading, I'll go and see a tarot reader and then just get a formal reading, because it's just like I'm missing the neutrality a little bit. So if I want to put in one, it's easier to have it done by someone who doesn't know you as much as you believe you do. But yeah, I'm just interested in trying to understand also like the mechanics of what's happening when I read cards, like um not to toot my own horn, but I managed to have a practice. I've got people comes to see me, and they come back, and I've been in people's life for sometimes many years now. And so there is something, like whatever I read on the card, what's the source of that projection, like what's the essence of what I'm seeing, like what am I supposed to funnel here? Is it the person? Is it something from the divine? Is it something that I read in the person rather than in the card? It's just very hard to know. I don't know if I'm I hope I'm magical, but also maybe I'm not. I remember once in one of your event you mentioned that one of your guests wrote that article, which I asked you after to send me, because it was just so interesting. It was an article on how like basically diviners are like very often victim of childhood trauma, and that basically their hypersensitivity, like of like trying to kind of hyper read, like an abusive parent, allow them to later on to just kind of develop those almost extrasensory abilities to read people. And as much as I would love to just be a wizard, I'm also since I've been not a brutalized child, but I have like a very complex family history and stuff. I'm just wondering about that too, like what happened, like who's the source of the projection? Is it what am I feeling, what am I feeling really? And I might not know, but I found that fascinating.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing piece. He actually gave that talk too at Morbid Anatomy when
Mhm.
I was physically in New York, and we did physical events there. And then now, of course, we have our live
We'll do
online
it
events.
whenever you want. Just tell me, and we'll do it. I don't know, at the cemetery or something. We'll find you a cool place to do an event if you want to.
Yeah, that would be fun. When and if I ever get to New York again, that would be really fun. Um, yeah, but no, that's an amazing piece, and I found that really eye opening as well. You talked about if it's like either abusive parents or like really narcissistic parents, and and it's someone that's just like completely in their own world, and the child has to learn to, yeah, like anticipate what they're going to do and their reactions like ahead of time in order to kind of protect themselves. Yeah, and I can relate to that, so
Yeah, it
but
was a beautiful read, I can tell you this.
takes the kind of, yeah, but I think a lot of that can be found, I think magic is something that's totally natural. It's just stuff that we don't understand yet or don't have the kind of
Mm.
science to explain, but it doesn't mean it's not happening, just because we're not able to understand what's happening doesn't mean it's not happening. So to me, it's all natural. The supernatural is natural to me.
It's the supernatural is super natural.
It's
Uh,
supernatural.
it's supernatural. Yeah, and I feel like just it's just such a I feel like there like I feel like that space never really shifted for some people, and that's the thing. And then we all kind of recognize each other when we see each other, like this is, I think that one of the humanly speaking, that just kind of like not knowing but kind of knowing, like that person never abandoned that kind of enchanted territory. Like it's something that all brings us together at some point. It feels like a lot of great friendship, we're kind of like, okay, we kind of belong together, but we can't really understand why. Let's just stick around. and, so, and so like there is this strange power of, like it's like it has like this strange power to kind of, we found each other at some point. And that's the great the great comfort I found in it too, like being able to know that. I think that was weirdly enough, like I'm not, I'm no Rachel Pollack, but she's such an amazing,
She's an
uh,
icon.
yeah, she does, but I'm so proud to be a friend, then she, like she wants to, like I used to go to Rhinebeck like once every couple of months, and we'll have, like we'll just have food and go to the bookstore, and then she will bring me to some like cool places, and like she'll drive me around and tell me stories and play games and look at cards, and just that thing where, like I'm not I'm a very shy person, and I'm very easily intimidated, specifically by people I respect. I've kind of like shut down, and I'm just like completely socially awkward. But yeah, with just some people, like we just meet, and then things are completely natural. And Rachel is one of those people where just like she never she just she she's the empress in her own magical domain, like. And I had like several conversation about that with her. It's just like this idea of magic equating to control, and how, for her, and very much for me too, it is very much like an expression of like the poetics of nature, like we just see through, like synchronicity, or things, object we found, the way language, kind of rebound on my life, which is something that always it's very funny. I will see words, or I will hear them, or just like like language has always been something very bizarrely big signifier in my life. And how, like somehow we don't have to. I'm saying that, I'm not, being, I don't want to be upsetting to people who do ceremonial magic, but I know that for me, it's not so much about trying to do a recipe to get a results. It's more kind of just like, like observing, very much like a naturalist, and seeing what, like what the poetics of nature brings to the surface for me to read and maybe make meaning out of.
Yeah, I like that too. Maybe do a little gardening.
A
And I
little
also want to make sure we mention too that your classes, you teach tarot as well.
Yeah, I teach. Ha ha ha! Come to my class. Well, yeah, but it's just teaching is great. I I love it so much. I get to meet incredible people like Gabriella, and and then just I'm just really I'm really amazed by it's just the creativity of people. They're like complete um how can I see this? People are longing for imaginative work. And I think, that's what we do in the class. We read cards. I have cards. I have classes where I talk specifically about tarot history, or at least, try to kind of unfold the history of those images. But yeah, it's just like it's a little clubhouse, like we have fun, we do tarot, we speculate things. I like to use, like a lot of the work I do is very much linked to, artistry and history. So I'm using, images to kind of like, how can I say that, to stimulate the imagination in general. So like, if you can read an image, you can read all images, whether it is a tarot card or a surrealist photography, or like an image, a photograph of you from the past, and kind of like read between the lines of things. There's a lot of there those image can be unpacked in so many ways. So this is basically what I do with people. I'm trying to teach them how to I can't teach them what I know, because I don't know how I know what I know. But I can teach them how I find it. And it's just through a playful creative practice, which I personally live as, I'm because I'm an introvert, and I like this is my revolt against the world, just being a crazy art witch, doing, my creating this kind of like world against the grain. I've always been a big Riesman's, I love that novel so much, the Against Nature. But it's just, this is what I like I can offer to people, building their, I love always loved world builders, and I think that when the world uh becomes such an hostile place, like we can find refuge in, doesn't mean we have to only live there, but we can find refuge in, like, yeah, like, introspective places where we can meet ourselves, and realize that we can also befriend part of ourselves that we don't know. I think it's important. I think a lot of people during the pandemic got locked in with a part of themselves that they couldn't handle. And I think that a lot of people took those classes during that time, and one of the student um, described herself as a quarantine tarot baby, and I thought it was very adorable. But it's true, people kind of suddenly felt like this, that they felt compelled to use the tarot because it allowed them to just find some kind of pathway in the jungle. They can machete their way off the jungle of stress and dark thoughts and chaos around them. So anyway, so I teach all the time. morbidanatomie.org class section. You'll find it.
Yes, I will link to it. No, it's amazing. And I love on your Instagram how you're always showing images and saying what does this card remind you of? It's like helping people generate their own kind of ideas about things instead of just telling them this is what this is like.
Yeah, and it shows that also, like, I think people want. I'm very surprised that sometimes people feel that they love the dogma. They love that, to have like an overpowering person telling them this is what this is what tarot is. This is the rules. Don't go out of the. This is, by the way, actually, and I think, like, what I'm not trying to make a very important point apart from, like, showing beautiful images and then giving people an opportunity to play. But it's interesting. I think people suddenly are confronted to the multiplicity of answers, and I think that it allows them to be a lot more open about, like, different interpretation. The fact that there is not, of course, there can't be one unilateral answer. So tarot, it doesn't work this way. It's not a science, it's subjective. That's why it can reinvent itself from one generation to the next.